Hi, John Fisher from Sonoma County and Charter Selpus. This will be a short overview of IEP implementation, the newest compliance reporting process from the California Department of Education. In this part, I'll talk generally about the process and provide some suggestions about methods of data collection. We will produce a second presentation before the actual data is due to be reported to CDE to help out with that. Our goal today is to understand what information CDE is seeking, to know the general time frame, how to prepare for data collection, and hopefully help you work through this process smoothly and efficiently. The California Department of Education, CDE, is beginning to track data on IEP implementation. Basically, it wants to know what percentage of a student's services, as listed on the IEP, were actually delivered. To do this, CDE will provide a random sampling of students for reporting LEAs to report on. So, what about non-public schools? If you have a student placed at a non-public school, you, as the responsible district, will be reporting on the student. The data that you will need is data normally collected by the non-public school, such as attendance and service logs, so make sure the appropriate data is communicated to you if you have a selected student who is placed in a non-public school. Now, here's a summary of the process. The data collection period is March 1st through April 28th, 2023. You don't know who the students to be sampled yet are, so you need to make sure that you are appropriately tracking that data for all students with IEPs. Later, we'll talk about what that entails, which shouldn't be too big a burden on districts. Sometime in April, each reporting LEA will be provided a list of SSID numbers for the students to be reported on. The number of students varies by district depending on the number of students with IEPs in the district. The LEA should have data on services actually delivered to the students and be able to calculate what percentage of services as listed on the last consented to IEP were actually provided during the time frame from March 1st to April 28. Please note that non-instructional days such as school breaks, holidays, and non-student days would not be included. Then, in June, these percentages for the selected students would be reported on the portal CDE will set up. It is not even reporting on the individual students. It is summary data indicating, out of the selected students, how many had 95 to 100% of services implemented, how many had 90 to 94.9%, and how many were below that. On my example here, this district had 10 students selected. 7 received 95 to 100%. 2 received 90 to 94.9%, and 1 received less than 90%. To ensure accuracy of submitted data, CDE will audit 10% of LEAs. It is expected that the audited LEAs would have to have records and show the calculation methodology used to derive the figures reported to CDE. Thus, it is important to report accurately and have a consistent, defined, and hopefully straightforward calculation methodology. Okay, so now to the question of what you should be doing during the data collection time period. In all likelihood, you won't have to change your current processes or collect additional data. For legal purposes, LEAs should be keeping service data anyway, so it can be determined in a dispute or compliance review that IEP services were rendered. For this process, you only need the percentage of service time delivered. You do not need to collect what's being worked on, though that could be useful for legal purposes. So you don't have to track what goals are being worked on or the content area covered, etc. We're just looking at the percentage of services delivered, whatever kind of service that is, from specialized academic instruction to speech to counseling to transition to OT. Finally, non-instructional days such as school holidays, School breaks, non-student professional development days do not count. There are many options for documenting services. Many districts use Excel or Google Sheets. Some districts use the SACE feature, Service Tracker. Others may use paper and pencil, or even quill and parchment. Rest assured, you may continue to record your services in the same way, whatever works well for your LEA. First, let's look at regular services. By this we mean services that are delivered regularly at fixed dates and times. Examples are, the student is pulled out 3 times per week for reading support from an ed specialist, or the student is pulled out 1 time per week for 50 minutes for speech services, or the student is in a special day class for 2/3 of the day every day and is in general ed classes the remaining 1/3. Or finally, the student receives scheduled push-in services 3 times per week in math class. Particularly for secondary, you should be able to track using attendance, the student's schedule, and their IEP minutes. That is, if the student attended a particular class period in which they receive special education services, then they receive the service. If the student is pulled out every Wednesday, the service provider should have a log indicating that the student attended their session. So for elementary students pulled out, it is probably safest for the provider to have a service log. But for the special day class or secondary teacher with a special education class, attendance should be sufficient. For services that are variable or irregular, such as a pullout when the student needs extra supports, service logs will be needed. If you're keeping service logs, make sure to include the date, the student, the number of minutes of service given, and the type of service. At this point, we've received some conflicting information about how to include student absences in the count. This doesn't really affect how you collect data during the monitoring period, as it only has an effect when you calculate your percentages to report to CDE. Rest assured, we will provide guidance when this is clarified. If you have a student that is only with your LEA for part of the monitoring period, that student won't be one of the selected students. An example would be if the student transferred out of your school district in, say, early April, CDE won't select that student. If there is a change in services, such as a new service or a change in minutes, this will have to be taken into account. So long as you're keeping records, it should be no problem. That said, when reporting time comes, you'll need to be able to determine exactly what services and minutes were on a student's IEP. We've created a search called IEP Implementation in SACE for this purpose. You should run the search on April 28th so you're locked in as to exactly what services the student had on that date, just in case their services change after April 28th. If you want to, you can also run one now. Then you can compare to more easily identify if a student's services changed during the monitoring period. If you have any further questions, please feel free to contact me, John Fisher, Program Specialist at the SELPA, or Sherry Roberge, Data Specialist at the SELPA. Thanks.